Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Book 10 of Aristotle's Categories is devoted entirely to discussing four main types of what we translate as opposition. And you notice that I've got some Greek terms up here. Antikesthai is a verb, and antikemena is the participle for that verb, meaning the things that verb applies to. And so antikesthai means being opposed, and we talk about two things being opposed to each other in a variety of ways. And Aristotle wants to clarify for us what the antikemena, the things that are opposites or are opposed to each other, how they're actually connected with each other. Because not every form of opposition is, for example, being contrary or being affirmatives and negations. He wants us to be clear so that we can tell when we're dealing with opposites precisely what kind of opposites we have in front of us. Because the different sorts of opposites are related to each other in different ways, and so what applies to one of them may not follow from what we know about another or apply to another. We want to be careful to distinguish these. So what are these four types? We have correlatives, we have contraries, we have privatives and positives, and we have affirmatives and negatives. And when you look at this list and you think about the categories, if you've been reading through the work, we've already talked quite a bit by this point about correlatives. As a matter of fact, there's an entire category that's devoted to this, the topros t, right? The relation or relative. So correlatives are those things that fall under relation. Then we have contraries, and we've talked about contraries quite a bit. For example, substances don't have contraries. Many qualities are in fact contraries to other qualities. We can go on, and those are enantia. Those are very important. Then we have a fuller discussion of what we can translate, and it's a little bit difficult to do this, as privatives and positives. Or another way of translating this sometimes is privations and states, steresis and hexis. And then we have opposition within language or within thought, when thought is being modeled after language, when we have affirmatives and negatives. Kataphasis. Kataphasis is when you're saying something of something, you're declaring that or you're stating that to be the case. Apophasis, the opposite of that, you're negating it. You're saying that that's not the case. So let's talk very briefly about each of these in turn and look at the examples that Aristotle gives us. Double versus half for correlatives. This is one that he's used already in the discussion of relation. Remember, too, that this is not a quantity term, but a relation term. Correlatives are of each other. They have their meaning in relation to something else. So double only really means something in relation to what it is the double of, that is the half. If we're talking about pieces of chalk, and we say that this piece of chalk is double the length of these two pieces of chalk, we are comparing them against each other. You can't just say this is double and then leave it blank, because that doesn't mean anything. There has to be a correlative to which it is related and makes sense. Then we have contraries, and we've given a lot of discussion to these in other parts of the work, and we're going to give a bit more discussion to these in this chapter as well. Good and bad he uses as classic examples here. Agathon, kakon. We could talk about black and white. He also uses that. If we're staying in the realm of the senses, the bitter and the sweet, Aristotle tends to conceive of as opposites to each other because he places them along a spectrum. Then we get to things like blindness and sight. Why blindness and sight? Why aren't they simply contraries? We're going to go into some discussion of that as we move through the work in another lecture video. Suffice it to say here, blindness is a lack. It is a steresis, a taking away, an absence, a privation of the faculty of sight. We could say, same thing about taste, right? Those who lack a sense of taste. Happened actually to a chef at one point who had cancer and who had to work at recipes essentially from memory and based on his knowledge of flavor profiles and how they interact. Similar to Beethoven in his period of deafness, having to understand music no longer through the sense itself, but in the absence, the privation of that sense. Then we have affirmatives and negatives. Aristotle gives as examples, he is sitting, he is not sitting. Notice what he doesn't use for that. He doesn't say he is sitting, he is standing, because he is standing would be another kataphasis, another declaration or affirmation, just of something different. We can do this as well with, this is double, this is half, right? This is not double, this is not half. This is good, this is not good, this is bad, this is not bad. So affirmatives and negatives can apply in language and then, secondarily in thought to any of these other types of oppositions. But as affirmations and denials or negations, they are something different from the rest of these. So it's important to keep in mind the distinction between these four types of opposition. They are not all the same.